Okay, see.
All right, good evening. Good evening. I'd like to call this operations work group dated October 14th to order. We will start off with public comment.
Okay, we have two in-person public commenters that will speak together. Jaden and Jalen McMillan, if you want to come up to this laptop up here, make sure your face is on the video. You're welcome to come here and you'll have your phone. Got this.
Good voice, powerful voice.
Welcome to speak at this one. You can have a chair.
Can I start?
Yes, whenever you're ready.
I want to take a moment to sincerely thank my previous principal, Candace, for the support she provided during my academic journey at Kennedy. From the very start, Candace saw something special in me and my twin, encouraging us to believe in our abilities. Candace's kindness and the dedication made a real difference in my life, as she always took the time to listen to my ideas and concerns. Whether it was inspiring books or a one-on-one conversation, Candace created an atmosphere where every student felt valued, oh my God, valued and empowered. She believed in my potential and motivation me to work harder and strive greatly, reminding me that I could achieve determination. Candace was committed to setting high expectations for all of us, critically and pushed us to go beyond what we thought we could achieve. Candace's unwavering support and guidance taught me the importance of perseverance, and I am grateful for the lessons I learned under her leadership because of her encouragement. And now I approach challenges with confidence, and I will tackle whatever that comes in my way. I will carry her and inspiring words with me as I continue to grow educational journey. If we could Google people and purpose and pride, I'm pretty sure Miss Candace Terrell will pop up.
That's it. That's what we have for public speakers to say, yeah. Told you to write it down.
I'm sorry, what's that?
That was all we had for public speakers in person.
Oh, got it. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. All right, moving to the approval of minutes. I move to approve the minutes from the operations work group meeting dated September 16th, 2024. Can I get a second?
Second, Maya Pearson.
Okay. Is Megan with us?
Yeah.
Okay, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Okay, let's move on to item 4.1, the human resources report and status to begin the year.
Thank you very much, Chair Castro, members of the operations work group. We are here tonight to go through some data as it relates to the start of the school year. Some of this I do understand or believe that it's data that you've seen in the past, at least from last year. Some of it might be data that you've requested that we're now presenting. All of it, I think, is going to be important for us to continue to measure our ability to fulfill the expectations of our community. And I'll have Jennifer Trundell from HR make the presentation, and we will certainly stand for questions It's important to me that seeing this in the format of that you let us know if this is, the kind of data that you find useful in your monitoring of our progress in the district. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Dr. Gothard and Chair Castro. We have our grounding strategic framework goals slides. Our core value. And the agenda for this evening, starting off with the human resources update. You want to go to slide 6, Jesse? This is an overview. This is slide 7, but thank you. This is slide 7 is good. Just orienting myself to the slides. This evening, I would like to provide updates in the following area: the current school vacancies, and these are current as of last week, because our data is always a moment in time, and this was all captured last week, so it is just a little old, but very relevant to right now. So we have our current school vacancies, our vacant FTE by employee group, a vacant position count, the teacher vacancy count by school, we have our sub-fill rates for this year and last year, providing rate the ethnicity of our staff, our years of experience, and our employee turnover from the previous year. So our first slide this evening are the elementary school teacher vacancies by FTE. And this is for the first 6 weeks of the school year for both 2023-24 and for 24-25. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at, there we go. So the green shows what we were last year and the purple shows where we are this year. So there was a pretty significant improvement in those teacher vacancies year to year. If you would go to the next slide. These slides are by each of the grade levels, the elementary, middle, and high school. So showing again 23-24 compared to 24-25 at the middle schools. And the next slide is the high school teacher vacancies. And these are overall teacher vacancies at all of the high schools. And the next slide is the entire district school teacher vacancies. Again, comparing last year to this year. The next slide. This is a breakdown of our vacant FTE, and this was as of last Monday, October 7th. This is the FTE by employee group. So you can see there were 31.7 teacher vacancies, approximately 16 vacancies in the EA unit, which includes our special education assistants. And there will be time at the end for questions. So we have attended, oh, can you go to the previous slide? It's okay. Yes, we are still, so we have 31 vacancies for teacher positions, and this is less than the number that we had in 23-24. And we are still working on filling these positions and having all of the grade level vacancy positions at 0 by the end of the semester. In order to fill these vacancies this year, to continue to fill these vacancies by the end of the semester, we've attended a job fair at UW Whitewater. There's a bilingual job fair on October 23rd at the Madison College Goodman South campus. We're also sending out targeted emails to some of the candidates who are still in our pools, so that we're keeping people who have applied, making sure that they get that touch, and we want them to know that we still have openings. We still are interested in having them come to work with us. Okay, next slide. Again, this is another view of our vacant position count, and this view is by school. So it has all of the schools on here. The next slide is the teacher vacancy count by school. As we started out the beginning of the school year, we started with 28 schools who had no vacancies. We had 21 schools that had between 1 and 2 vacancies, 2 schools that had between 3 and 4 vacancies, and 1 school that had between 5 and 6, and no schools that had 7 or more vacancies. Moving on to the next slide. This highlights our teacher fill rate between last year, our sub-teacher fill rate between last year and this year. Last year, we did not see a fill rate of over 75% until the end of the first semester. And this year we started out over 75%. So we had spent the summer recruiting subs, working on ways to have the sub experience be better in our schools. And also we appreciate that the board approved the bonuses for the sub teachers. Next slide. Our sub SEA fill rate, again, in comparison to last year, we've started out this school year in a much better place than we did last year. The board approved a pay increase for sub SEAs, so that their pay scale is equal to a first-year SEA. The next slide is the race and ethnicity of our staff for 2024-25. There's a lot of numbers on here and it's very small, so I'm not going to read them all. And the comparisons here are the same comparisons that are, well, the listings, I should say, like district administrators and principals are broken out in the same way that they are in our budget book. So that if you wanted to compare, the budget book is by FTE and this is by actual personnel, like person count. So it won't be an exact match, but it will be very close. And the next slide shows the staff years of experience. We can see that our teachers are between 0 and 5 years of experience. 43.3% of our teachers land there. And then it's a 5-year breakout until we have a few of those therapy assistants and interpreters who are at 31+ years. And the last slide that I have for this evening is the employee group turnover for last. So it's looking at our starting count, how many employees for each group resigned, how many were hired, and then our end count. That is my last slide. So if you have questions.
Thank you. All right, board member Nichols, Nichelle.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, let me just start with some appreciations for the significant improvements we've made in starting the year. To be at 22 vacancies across the district this year or at last week as of the 6th week compared to 62 vacancies the year before at the same time is really significant. And to also see that there are 28 schools that have 0 vacancies right now is an amazing way to start the year. So thank you for all of your efforts in that. I do just have a couple of questions about some of the data on the slides, just because I'm not sure if I'm tracking right. So slide 12 that shows the vacant FTE by employee group.
Mhm.
Can you talk about these numbers again relative to the vacancies? Because when I see like the 31.698, that kind of spike up, which I think you said was
It's teachers.
is the teachers group. How is that number 31, but it looks like there's only 22 vacancies district-wide? And maybe I'm not interpreting the numbers in the right way.
This slide includes all teacher vacancies, including anything that was Doyle-based. The other slides were school-based.
Got it. Okay, so there's,
So we do have some programs, including the OYR that are not based out of school and some Doyle-based positions.
okay, thank you. So this is inclusive of all that would hold a teacher's license,
Yes,
even if they're not school-based.
correct.
And then is that 15.996 on this same slide, is that for custodial or is that education assistant?
That's education assistants.
Okay,
The custodians is 10.
okay, thank you. It's just a little harder to read.
Mhm.
Then for the following slide, slide 13. I have a question about the 3 locations that have 10. So I'm trying to make sure I'm reading this. So district-wide is one of the locations that has
Mhm.
10 vacancies. And is that,
These are all vacancies.
this is all positions?
All
Okay,
positions.
got it.
Yes.
And then is that next one La Follette?
The next, yeah, the one that is at 10, but that would include teachers and SEAs, and it could include custodians or
And food service?
service.
Okay, thank you. And then the next one where I see 10, is that Flom?
Correct.
Okay, okay, so these are all vacant positions. Okay, wonderful. On the next slide, where you look at the number of teacher vacancies and then how many schools are kind of experiencing that level of vacancy. I just wanted to say, like, this is a pretty remarkable slide to see 28 schools that have 0 vacancies right now, if I'm reading this correctly. 21 of our schools having 1 to 2 vacancies. Only 1 school with 5 or 6. And then 0 schools with 7 or more vacancies.
For
So,
teachers.
what was that?
For teachers.
For teachers, okay. For the 1 school that has 5 to 6 teacher vacancies, can you talk a little bit about what your targeted recruitment, hiring, placement strategies are to help that school that seems to have the most vacancies?
Sure, I can do that. So we are continuing to leverage our talent portal, which is our applicant tracking system, and we can see how many applicants that we have for each opening, and we are doing we are reaching out to those candidates. So I think I'm not answering your question. So let me.
Well, since you have 1 school that has kind of a slightly higher number of vacancies, I was just wondering like what the HR strategy is to like really hone in on that 1 school to try to get that number of vacancies down. That's mostly what I'm asking.
Okay, and we are like taking a holistic approach and looking at, you know, what is happening at that school, providing not just for that school, but for all schools, providing subs so that they long-term subs, so they're not feeling the impact of having those 7 vacancies.
Okay,
But again, we were at a job fair that was last week in Whitewater. There's one that's coming up next week at Madison College. Again, with this, the CC teachers, we're keeping, and a lot of the vacancies are in CC and special ed. So
Okay,
we're continuing to call them and reaching out to them so that they know that we still have vacancies. We're working with the principals to really work through the process, because sometimes it can take up to 2 weeks to fill a vacant. Like, once someone gets that interview and has the job offer, we have to wait on transcripts, and, you know, there's definitely a process. And when I pulled this data, there may have been somebody who was in that onboarding process,
but hasn't been.
but hasn't been moved over.
And if I could, Jennifer, I know there's a couple other hands, this might help as well. So buildings are also in the position where who's really doing a great job, and they welcome that being, you know, the temporary position. So as you see that sub fill rate higher, that too impacts the ability to cover those classes that are open. Sometimes that turns into a full-time teacher. I know several substitute teachers who end up being a full-time regular hire, you know, subsequently. LaFollette, I just wanted to shed some light. I quick went into the dashboard just to give you an idea of what that 10 looks like.
Mhm.
There's 4 teacher vacancies, 0.85, 0.15, 0.4, and 1.0, kind of spread out.
Oh,
2 custodians, 2.7 EA. So that together is what that 10 equates to.
mm,
Again, all significant. We want to get all of our buildings full. But, you know, and sometimes those are really difficult to fill. I mean, you know, you put a 0.15 out there and not many people want to come and do that. So
mhm.
then you're looking at a situation where maybe somebody covers outside of their regular, you know, they get an overload, or there's other ways that we can cover down on that section.
Mhm. Thank you for those insights. My Chair Castro, I just have like one kind of final follow-up, and then I'll definitely make space and time for the rest of the board members. So Jennifer, can you clarify? My recollection, and it could be a little fuzzy, but my recollection has been that in previous years, once we get to a certain time period in the school year, maybe it's the 6-week mark, maybe it's the 8-week mark, maybe it's 10, I don't really know, but somewhere at the beginning of the year, it becomes harder and harder to fill vacancies, right? Because people are now, if they've applied elsewhere and have been hired elsewhere, they're settled in. And I know that I heard you say that you were gonna go to job fairs and you're gonna continue to work with local, you know, post-secondary institutions and other places to keep trying to recruit. But I think my wondering is that, do we think that those 22 vacancies that we see right now will be harder to fill from this point forward, just because of the timing of the year?
They generally are harder to fill, because most people who have graduated in the spring have already had a job offer.
Okay.
Or they're working somewhere else. But again, all of this is a moment in time. And so we are having, you know, unfortunately, we don't retain everybody, and not every other school district retains everyone. So there are people who are still looking for positions. They
Okay.
just, but you know, there are fewer candidates compared to when everyone is looking over the summer. But we are, you know, with our applicant tracking system, we can see the number of applicants that each position has. So we're just making some targeted efforts towards all of those candidates.
Okay, and as you're trying to focus on still filling, do you all have a strategy in mind around retention? Like, is there a way that you all are focusing on making sure that the people that we do have aren't considering leaving?
Yes, and it's HR, but it is everybody in the district. It is professional learning and leadership development. There are program that, you know, there's the mentoring that comes from what Jorge and Lachelle are doing. There's the ALSI program, because once you start here, you can take advantage of some of the grow your own. It's open enrollment starts tomorrow. So we're trying to highlight our benefits, and all of those pieces play into how we retain staff.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I think I saw your hand up, Board Member Vandermillen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Hi, Jennifer. You've been doing a great job, and HR has been doing a great job. I'm notoriously critical. I'll be the first to admit it, but good work deserves progress, and it deserves its own reward. And I think you've managed to turn it around quite nicely. My question is this. I know the board has put some significant investments in HR and in funding of our teachers. Do you believe those investments have helped us to retain the teachers that we have?
Thank you for your question, Board Member Vandermeulen. I have been watching our separations, and as I look at the data, and the $5 an hour increase went into effect in October of 2022, and the 8% increase went into effect on July 1st of 2023. And we did see a pretty significant reduction in the number of teachers who submitted their resignations at the end of the 23-24 school year. I would like to have at least one more year of data to compare for that 8% increase.
I know you're not Nostradamus. Can I ask one more? I'm sorry I cut you off, didn't I?
Go ahead.
I apologize. Someday I will learn how to use Zoom. Tonight is not one of those nights. Very, very simply. As I said, we invested a lot. If we were to have to not invest as much, would this hurt retaining teachers and keeping our class sizes small?
Let me see if I understood your question. So if the board were not to continue to invest in wages,
No, I phrased that horribly, so forgive me. What I meant to say, if we do not keep up our investments in HR for any reason, would that affect our ability, the number of teachers we are to retain?
it has significantly helped the department to have the number of staff that we have. Yes, it would impact. We have a dedicated recruiter. We were able to add a couple of additional staff, and that has made the workload just a little bit lighter for the existing staff.
I happen to agree, and I've been in a lot of the classrooms and I've been seeing a lot of that. So I want to thank you again, because I think we're finally turning this around, and for a good reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Board Member Pearson.
Yeah, my question was somewhat already answered, but it was just around the strategies that we're using and how effective they've actually been at going to the fairs. I feel like we hear a lot about we're going to fairs, we're doing this, but I guess, like, are there any other strategies that we are employing to kind of recruit folks? And then I think it was answered somewhat around the retention, because that's something that we're still waiting for, is the retention plan and hiring plan. Thanks.
Thank you for your question. The retention and recruitment is actually on deck as the topic for the next quarter HR update, but we are continuing to use LinkedIn, Indeed, Facebook, and the district website, using social media to do some recruiting efforts. And we definitely want to provide the board with some of our return on investment numbers for those job fairs and career fairs and the other recruiting events that we've been going to.
Thank you.
Board Member Mosner Feltham.
Thanks. So exciting. Nice work. Yes, this is helpful data. I have a question, two questions. One is, in the slide, the last slide about separated, like it's total to start with, separated, hired, ending number. That's separations of all kinds or specifically resignations?
It is separations of all kinds, so it does include retirement.
Okay, cool. And then I have a question about the years of experience. I have a question, first is like, is that years of experience in MMSD or
Yes.
would, okay, so like a principal who was hired in MMSD last year but has 10 years in a different district would be in that first column. Correct. Okay. Okay, then I guess I'm just sort of curious what you make of that slide that shows number of years of experience, like what insights it gives you and your team when you look at that?
Sure. It tells us that we have a lot of people who don't have a lot of experience at MMSD.
Okay.
And so we have to, we need to focus on the retention piece of it. A lot of it is showing us, like, we're 5 years past the first year of COVID. So as we move through time, we're hoping that we see more in, that 6 to 20 year experience, our number of years of experience. It can tell us, up to about 15% of our staff could, this isn't really age-based, but, just projecting onto the people who have between 20 and 31 years of experience, we could have, 15% of the teacher workforce leave next year.
Some things I wonder about with that are like, I think about like the culture of a school building or this culture of a district and the importance that a principal plays in that and the importance that, we've heard so much from our student services staff about the importance of like in-department mentors who have lots of experience. And I'm sort of wondering like, so you have this data about who's been here how long. Does that ever get over to professional learning in like a collaborative conversation? Does that ever get over to principal meetings and focused on like, okay, what does it mean that 80% of assistant principals are like kind of new to the district? Can you tell me a little bit about how that conversation, how this information comes from your office and then like spreads out to find root other places?
I don't know that we've pulled this information and provided it before.
But I can share that this was eye-opening for me. And it tells me that we very much should be using this to direct all of our front-facing communication, the way we onboard people, the way we welcome people, hold on to people in the district. I'm in that 50.9% 0 to 5 years.
Right.
District-wide administration, right? So yes, I have other experiences, but it's different transitioning to a new place, new colleagues, new supports, new board, right? So I do think that this, again, I was sharing this over the weekend with somebody, of all the, 0 to 5 and 6 to 10 year folks that we have. And I think we very much need to hold ourselves, a lot of times we think it's just the way it works in MMSD. That's not true because many of our staff don't have that experience here. So it's time for us to truly hear from each other to build the kind of culture that we all need to be successful.
I also wonder, thank you. I also kind of wonder, like, knowing how much the sort of like political context around us in our state has changed, how much the context around education nationwide has changed over the past 10, 15, 20 years. I would be super curious what folks who have been able to stick with MMSD in the long term have to say about what makes that possible for them and what they've seen shift for the better and shift for the worse. Because even though we have a lot of people in that new column, we also have people towards the right-hand side of that chart too. And I would love to be purposefully asking those folks about their insights and impressions. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to see just the change year over year. And I guess my last sort of question comment is like, I know in the past, there's been frustration in building leaders who are like, I'm trying to hire someone and it takes 1,000 years.
Mhm.
Do you have a sense, I know you didn't provide that data today and that's totally fine, that's significantly improved? Are you're like, yes, we don't have that time numbers, but you can see it all in this data, or is that still turning into a problem?
It is, sometimes it feels like a problem. We are trying to leverage our applicant tracking system and get those pieces of data that say that it takes 2 weeks, or it takes 4 weeks, or it's taking 6 weeks, and how we can really dig into that to see how we can make changes and see what our pain points are. This year, we kind of did an all call to hiring authorities and said, because we had more insights into where people were in the hiring process, it was like, everyone needs to be a part of this. So they can't, like, if reference checks need to be done by a hiring authority, you've been sitting on this for 4 days, or you've been sitting on this for 6 days, and we are trying continue to improve our hiring manager experience as well as our candidate experience, and find where those pain points are.
Okay, great.
So hopefully by next year over the summer, we can provide additional data with those hiring. Maybe it only takes a week from offer to onboarding.
Thanks.
We're excited to see that data, but we just don't have it yet quite yet.
Great, that's it for me.
Thank you, Board Member Muldrow.
Thank you, Chair Castro. My first question is for Bob. So when we look at the accumulative impact of the vacancies we've had since this fiscal year began, what is the total amount that has been generated in savings via vacancy?
I don't have that number right off the top of my head. I work with Jennifer's team in terms of putting that together, which we could pull together, which we will pull together, but I don't have that number right.
I think it's important to take into consideration, although we see a great reduction in vacancies, that starting the year short, between 20 and 30 educators generates a savings to the district. I think thinking about how other positions are impacted or implicated in that is relevant. And I think we have to be pretty clear right now about our use of resources as we are going to referendum. My other question kind of related to cost savings generated by vacancies is, I think, a piece of data that for me was missing in this conversation. So what it looks like is that we had the first day of school, and on the first day of school, we had around 31 vacancies, which is, about half of what we had last year. Or maybe a third of what we had last year. And then 6 weeks later, we have about 21 vacancies. Am I understanding that appropriately?
Jesse, can you pull up slide number 11?
That was elementary only,
That's elementary only.
21. I think it was 55 overall, 52, I'm sorry, 52.73 overall, down to 22.5 from week 1 to week 6.
Okay, so we started with 52 vacancies and now we're down to 21. And I'm just curious because we got the HR report at the end of September. And it includes kind of robust hiring. The hiring definitely outnumbers the resignations or terminations. However, there is a significant number of resignations and terminations, and I'm curious about how that's factoring in. And that actually fits into a larger question. So honing in on this last month of September, we saw people resign or retire, although I have a little bit of confusion in terms of the dates that are next to those, because some of it looks like that happened in September and some of it looks like June or July. So if you could talk me through that a little bit. what I've noticed over the last few years is that we lose people throughout the school year and we have a really hard time replacing them. So we actually end the year with more vacancies than we started with. And I've seen that be a consistent trend for 3 years, for multiple administrations. What is our sense of like anticipating those vacancies or those positions or those retirements mid-year and throughout the year? And our ability to fill those as we go? And how does the data you just presented us factor in the folks who left in September?
So the resignation or the HR transaction report includes a lot of people who did not like return over the summer. They made a life-changing decision. And so we backdate their resignation date to the end of their contract. And so they didn't work for us over the summer and didn't tell us until August that they were going to go somewhere else. And so that's why they have those dates that are in June. And that is because they didn't tell us until sometime between August 15th and September 15th. That's why they don't show up until the most recent HR transaction report. So there's always a lag and there's timing issues. We don't ever want to see anybody leave during the school year because the pool is just smaller for candidates throughout the school year. It would have to be someone who was disappointed at, with a different employer or somebody who is wanting to make a career change and try out education. We are trying to, I know that in the past the work has been very segmented into, we have the workbook season and we look at allocation, we look at how we're going to be staffing up for the school year. And we spend a lot of time focusing on hiring. And then that focus on hiring kind of falls off, but I definitely want the team to continue to look at the vacancies for this year and not have all of their focus be on one thing, because then we do end up the end of the school year with a pretty significant number of vacancies that haven't been filled for the whole year.
I am curious about kind of our long-term strategy. I want to ask a technical question about what you just explained to me. So we get people's contracts back by June 15th. My assumption has always been to avoid finding out in August that someone is no longer working for us. So is what you're saying is these are folks who we've got a contract from, but have decided not to return to the district despite making that commitment in June. Okay, I think that's helpful to understand. My next question was really about the diversity of our faculty and our staff. So if you don't mind going to that slide, Jesse. Yeah. I'm just wondering if you can talk me through kind of our recruitment strategy as it relates to educators of color, and as it relates to the diversity of our leadership and principals.
Do you want to do that now, or do you want to have that be part of the operations work group in January?
I feel like if you're better prepared to do that in January, I will completely respect that. I do want to say that I think we've all received a significant amount of data related to our achievement gap and what our district is like for young people of color and the impact on them academically. And we've heard over and over again for a very long time that having educators that look like you is really, really important to all of our young people. And so I hope that we're being really intentional in doing that work. And I think it's an area in which we need to be thoughtful and persistent. My last question in terms of kind of the staffing that you've presented is, how does this include positions that we've added over the course of the last years? So I do think there's a little bit of complexity in comparing a year where you add 50 positions, like the year we added village builders, to a year where we maybe add 5 or 10 positions. that being said, I think it's important that often when the board invests in additional staff, the hope is that that really alleviates strain across the district. And if we have a hard time filling those positions, it feels like the work we're doing is ineffective. So is there anything that allows for us to compare kind of additional staff or new staff or positions that were created that, you know, wouldn't have existed to be filled 3 years ago and HR is currently responsible for?
Sure. The employee group turnover sort of speaks to that. That's slide number 19, because it has a starting count and an ending count. It doesn't, this doesn't account for the additional positions that were added in 24, 25. Well, they were continuation, they were not additional. They were, sorry, it was different funding sources. So this particular slide shows a starting count of 3,947 employees and ended with 3,981. And those are actual like individual counts. It doesn't account for the FTE, but you can infer into that difference of almost, you know, of 40-ish people that could be made up of, you know, a larger amount of FTE.
The last thing I want to say, and this is part of what I think I really appreciate, is that over the course of the last 3 years, we had a practice of having central office staff sub schools on a very regular basis. Some folks from central office were subbing as much as 5 days a week, and then balancing their other role. And I think when we talk about kind of reductions, it's a complicated thing to say we really need this administrative staff, we really need this person at Doyle, but we're also using them as a sub. And it's a complicated thing for me to think, well, if this person on any given day could be assigned a completely different job and the organization is still functioning in terms of our administrative capacity, it does make me kind of wonder about the roles that we used as subs and what it means to discontinue using them in that way. So my first question is, are we still asking central office staff to sub?
We are not having central office staff sub this year.
And so then my next question is, what does that additional capacity at central office mean for our district? If those folks are no longer being asked to sub and they are being asked to fulfill their role within the administration, how does that shift the bandwidth of our administration?
Can I take that one?
Yes.
So I think, excuse the voice, I keep telling everybody I'm growing, so that's why the voice is like that. But I think two things happens. One, the majority of those staff members were from our teaching and learning department. That was one of the largest departments, such as our teacher leaders that was in there, really subbing and supporting our subs last year. So what it allows them to be able to do is to return back to supporting schools in a different way. So while they are not subbing on a day-to-day basis, they are still supporting schools in some capacity, whether it might be principals can say, I need support through our school support mechanism, so I need support through that. We needed support, for example, with having circles at school. Now we have more access for those central office staff members to be able to do that. We needed support with the teacher, a new on hire of a DLI that started today. Now we have capacity to be able to help that teacher staff to be able to do that. So while they are not subbing, they are still supporting schools. They are just supporting schools in a way that we actually probably intentionally designed for their roles to be able to support the school.
I greatly appreciate that. And I look forward to kind of hearing what that impact looks like throughout our schools. My last question is for our educators who need visas, our educators who are immigrants, our educators who are traveling. What is the support that they need in order to get into the classroom on day one. What I heard from several schools was that they had somebody, but they were caught up in the visa process. And I understand that our hands are tied. There's only so much we can do. That's not our bag. And at the same time, if there's a way we can be of greater support to some of our most necessary educators in terms of our bilingual educators, I would really like to see us do that. So I'm asking you how we can help in terms of that work.
We have used a company called Cultural Vistas who has done some recruiting for us. We did have, we had an RFP for another support company to come in and look at it, and we decided that our internal staff, it was what they were providing was not any different than what our internal staff was already providing, but at an additional cost and not a great return on the investment. So we did not engage with that company, but we still are looking. I meet weekly with our multilingual department and we talk about this and what we can do. There are a couple of the places who have reached out to us about other types of visas and how we can support those individuals who are here on not necessarily a J1 visa, but who have completed like an engineering degree at the university, but still have another year of eligibility. And they could teach for us. So we are continuing to explore a lot of different options in that for supporting staff who have visas. We do understand that they offer a tremendous amount of value to our students and our staff.
I really appreciate this presentation and the information you all have provided this evening. That's it for me.
Thank you. Board Member Simkin?
Yes, thank you. I'm gonna share appreciation as well. I feel like this is a success. So thank you. I'm really interested in learning from this. The board, we have invested a lot of thought and a lot of money into our staff. And I would love to see some analysis of that impact. Because I believe that has been impactful. And then we've also spent so much time talking with HR to try to figure out, like how do we start? And it feels like that's successful too. So it would be really, really important to really dig into this and figure out what are we doing right so that we keep doing it and so that we can share, that this time and this investment matters. So that's my first ask, is that we keep going deep into this to figure out why this is working well.
Yeah, and we're like, the climate and culture survey is going out to all employees, and we're excited to dig into that data once those surveys are complete and try to really see how that is impacting, how our climate and culture are impacting our retention, and how can we change anything to retain even more staff. So, okay, we're excited about that data.
That's great, because that's where I'm gonna go with my next thought, is we have two data slides that has a breakdown based on ethnicity. And then we have another one that has a retention breakdown, but we don't have a retention breakdown based on ethnicity. And I feel like that is really important. We know, and at least I know anecdotally, that it can be hard for people of color to be living in Madison, to be working in Madison. And at the school district. And so what we can't tell from this data is, are there revolving doors in some of our, with some of our folks and not with others? And I'd love to see that data so that we know if there are areas that we need to be doing things differently. I'm guessing that there are, and it would be helpful to dig in that way. So those are my two requests.
Okay.
Thank you.
Board Member Simkin, one thing related to your observation that I think is good for us all to keep in mind as well. Let's keep in mind that over the past 3 years, the federal government has invested $200 billion in ESSER funds as well. A lot of the workforce is being right-sized now as well. I mean, I was guilty of it in my previous work where created 100 new positions to do this, and it created vacancies behind it. So we're now, those funds are no longer here, and it's forcing the educated workforce to right-size a little bit as well. So I don't want to say that that's the reason why we're so much better this year, but I do think it played a role as well. There just weren't some of those extra positions, for folks to look into. So it really held the workforce a little bit more solid.
And I think that just my desire as a board member is to have our staff truly represent our student population. And so just continuing to really focus in on how we're getting there feels essential.
Thank you. And I just have a couple of comments or observations, as other board members have noted. I have noticed the concentration of, or one noticing I had was the concentration of Black staff amongst the security assistants and the educational assistants. And not that those positions don't fulfill important roles and are important, but that stratification by race can reinforce some negative racial stereotypes in our system. And so I really just want to emphasize that we continue continue and make sure that we keep our foot on the pedal with the grow your own techniques and strategies that we have invested in this year. And also just keep in mind that stratification is not healthy. And then moving forward, I do appreciate the kind of pinpoint data received tonight. Also want to elevate some of the other requests that we view data by board members, and that we link this with our staff surveys in our schools, and realizing that, we by and large have a younger staff now than we do. And so keeping that in mind when we think about retention techniques and such. But yeah, I would like to see this data embedded with how we interpret these staff surveys at schools and such. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our next agenda item, 5.1, revenue limit membership. And I believe this is Bob and Dr. Gothard.
Thank you, Chair Castro, members of the board. Assistant Superintendent Soldner is going to take us through a lot of repeat information that we have set up and structured so that we could get more and more information to get us down to approval for our 24-25 budget. As you know, tonight's is a little bit more nuanced than that in terms of two different budgets that are continue to be presented. But again, Bob is tonight going to share the most relevant, up-to-date information that we have, so you can be informed to make the decision based on our recommendation when it is that time. With that, I'll turn it over to Bob.
Thank you, Dr. Gothard. Just if you want to hop to slide 22. Just a refresher on the timeline in terms of what's happening now for us in the world of school finance. It's almost like Christmas Eve on October 14th, because October 15th is a big day for school finance. We'll get a little bit more into it, but we got some preliminary numbers in terms of revenue limit calculations tomorrow. Likely late morning, the state of Wisconsin will put on its website a revenue limit worksheet for each school district. And then equally important, once we get that revenue limit calculation, we'll get a certified state aid amount in terms of general school aids that we will receive this year, which will then let us know for the October board meeting, what is our total maximum property tax levy authority, right? So we need those two critical pieces tomorrow: revenue limits minus general school aids, and then we'll get maximum revenue. We're going to go through and talk about some projections that we've done to allow us to continue to have this conversation and the continuing fine tuning of the June preliminary budget that was approved by the board and the amendments that have been made since that time. So revenue limits is a 3-year rolling average of the third Friday per count. That's just a formula. What's important to note, it takes 3 full years to have the complete impact of third Friday in September. For us, what's important is third Friday, September last year, 2023, and the third Friday, September of this year in terms of a full-time equivalency calculation of our third Friday head count number is the numbers that we reported to EI is showing an increase. Last year, we increased by 18 FTE. This year, third Friday, September, just if you want to go to the next slide, is an increase projected right now today, and this will change as it always does as we continue to find our student counts. But we're up 125 full-time equivalent in terms of revenue limit. Those two things that I think are of importance for us. It's the second consecutive year that we're increasing our student counts compared to the prior year. We've talked a lot about our enrollment projections, which just a quick, kind of a little reminder, enrollment projections are based on birth rates. And if birth rates are low, it's really difficult for any model to say anything other than the projection would be less enrollments. However, birth rates don't account for the growth in grades 1 through 12, which we're seeing growth. So that's good for us in the sense, just if you go to the next slide, as you increase your revenue limit membership, two things really happen. One, you stop your erosion of your revenue limit base from year to year, which is part of the complications of revenue limits, which we'll get into a little bit more. But equally important, it allows one to retain and build base revenues moving forward from year to year. Because not only does it maintain your sustainable revenue base, right now under state law, you get an additional $325 per FTE as we move forward to build that base going forward. So that's real important for us. We talked about the increase in summer school. So summer school increased, and so did our third Friday in September. A little bit about why that changes is under state law, you use really 2 counting rules to qualify for the official revenue limit aid count. One is the child registered and attending on the third Friday of September? The other was the child registered and attended before the third Friday, September count date and any date after that third Friday in September. So by definition, you're going to be amending that count as you go through your school year, as you can legally count additional students. So we do expect it to change. It won't change a lot, but it'll change some. And then the other estimate, which the state put out an early estimate of our independent charter schools. That's showing a decline from the year before, and primarily I'm assuming the decline is pretty close to. We had an independent charter school, the Milestone Democratic School, closed at the end of last school year. They had about 90 FTE students. Approximately any one year, about 30 of those students FTE were our residents, and so we still have 2 independent charter schools operating, but the count is down 27 FTE from the year before. So to me, that's the explanation behind that, right? Had 1 independent charter school close, the count is down 27 FTE. Now, again, that's a preliminary number. We'll get an update. And just like our count changes during the year, so does independent charter school count change during the year. They have the same count requirements that we have. All right, so that's a bit of news, which I think I view that as positive news. Increase in enrollments of our full-time equivalency. Okay. You've seen this slide before. You will be approving 2 budgets. Hopefully you'll be approving 2 budgets. You will have 2 budgets before you, let me say it that way, at the October board meeting. One, it was what we've been calling option 1, is a budget that would be in effect if the operating referendum is successful on November 5th. That's called passage of the referendum. And the other resolution will be non-passage of the referendum, which is really in essence, the June preliminary budget that you've approved, plus the amendments that have happened since that time. Okay, so now this is, you received a handout, which is the budget adoption format that we publish in the state paper. By law, we're required to publish that preliminary budget. So this is my attempt to take that lot of numbers and get it kind of to the salient points to help you see the overview of the entire budget. Jesse, do we have any of the handouts of the attachment that was sent, the budget adoption?
I didn't print any.
Do you want me to go make some?
Yeah, Jen will.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's nice to be able to.
So that'll just show you the big numbers that I want to draw out on this slide.
Okay.
All right, so middle of the column is 23-24, again, unaudited actuals, but what we reported in terms of a change in the fund balance. And ending the year in 23-24 of $114.6 million. Okay, so non-passage of the referendum, that is really the updated preliminary budget that you approved in June to reflect the amendments that have happened since. Expenditures of 501.6, revenues of 455.3. Currently is projected to need $46 million one-time revenue to end the 24-25 school, which leaves a fund balance projected at $68.3 million, which is about right in the middle of the 10 to 15% fund balance out. In terms of the unassigned balance. The passage of the referendum, so assuming the referendum for operations is successful, assuming the board levies the entire amount, because remember, the referendum question is merely asking for the authority to raise property taxes. But assuming that the board would choose to use the entire amount, we would still need $22.9 million of our one-time revenue here in terms of a balanced budget, which would be projected to have a fund balance at the end of the year of $91.7 million, which if you look at fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 22, it's right about in the area where we were ending with a fund balance. So that's kind of the overall picture in terms of the two budgets that we're looking at. Now, maybe I'll wait for Jen.
She's coming in.
To get it, because the next slide is a lot of numbers.
Okay.
And I'll just say, it's a little bit of humor bringing into this conversation. TJ didn't get to edit this next slide.
For our board members that are online, their electronic version of that.
It's attached in.
Oh, it's in board docs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Jesse.
Are these different or are these the
No, I
same?
think that it's.
Okay.
The numbers are small and it'll get even smaller.
I have brought the wrong glasses for this.
When Jesse brings up the next slide.
Have to do these.
And I just want to say,
What happened?
with gratitude and thankfulness from my colleague to allow me to have these next two slides, just the way I wanted to. Put it. I recognize that. I recognize there's a lot of numbers. All right, so you will see these numbers in part on the second slide. But what I'm trying to do on this slide is to compare each non-passage and passage and show the comparisons to the prior year. In terms of the budget, now, we do comparisons to the levy the board approved last fall is what we're comparing the non-passage budget and the passage budget. So our comparison is what the board approved in 23-24, equalized tax rate at that time and the levy rate and the estimated impact on the average Madison home. And so I'm gonna immediately to the non-passage referendum proposed 24-25, which is the middle column on the first highlighted box. And when you compare that levy amount, 366,091,239 levy.
Wait. 166.
You gotta go to the second page.
Oh, okay.
Box down. That's why the slides are so much better. There's a lot of numbers in there.
I see you now. I'm with you. I'm on the side that has the property tax levy.
Correct.
Continue.
Correct. And so what I've done is I've taken, what you don't have in the budget publication required format for you is taking that levy and then taking another big table that we have that gives you the property, average Madison home property value and the tax impact. And then when we get firmly established of what it is you'll be looking at, and again, these are estimates. They're gonna change tomorrow, late morning when we get numbers from the state, but these are our projections at this point in time. Okay, so the total levy, again, looking at 366,091,239. Compared to last year, that's a decrease of $25.6 million in total levy, right? And so a combination of levying less and an increasing equalized tax base, the mill rate per, which is the tax per thousand, is 8.45, or a decrease of 1.34 mill rates, right? Which means non-passage referendums, you go down to the next now, right? So we take that mill rate times the average Madison value home of 457,300. And today, again, a projection today would be a tax bill this fall of 3,865 on the average Madison home, or a $292 decrease in this fall's tax bill compared to last fall's tax bill, right? Because we're levying $25.6 million less in total. Okay. Sorry, yeah.
I just wanna, yeah.
And I think there's a good place to pause. Chair Castro, if you don't mind, we can pause now for questions, because I think it's gonna be good to build our understanding. This can be complex.
Sounds good. Okay, I see your hand, Board Member Vandermeulen.
Oh, we can't see.
Okay, Bob, you and I have had many discussions on how I am not a numbers person, I'm a people person. So I'm gonna ask a few questions and I hope I can answer, but I'm trying to do the best I can with very complicated data and numbers, which are not kind of my thing. But my questions are as follows. In budget 2, the non-passing is budget 2, correct?
Correct.
If budget 2 were to happen, a non-passing were to happen, could we do the equity project of smaller class sizes?
Yes. So right now, regardless of the outcome of the referendum, we have a budget, the non-passage referendum budget. If you go to the slide before, would use $46.3 million of one-time revenues to end the 24-25 school year with a balanced budget. And that budget, in terms of the ending fund balance, leaves us a fund balance pretty much in the middle of the 10 to 15%, or about 12-13% of a fund balance.
My next question is, would that mean we'd have to look at other areas in passage of budget 2? What areas would we have to look at?
In the passage of the budget?
If the second budget passed, the non-passing budget passed, what is the board looking at? Will we be able to have the 46 million? How will this one-time fund balance be replaced? Can it be replaced?
Right, and so that's So that's really the question, right? That looks ahead to the 25-26 school year.
Right.
And the first thing I would say is, on a very high level, we would have to find 46.3, probably a little bit less, because we would have still some remaining fund balance. But if we just look at the budget, non-passage uses $46 million in one-time funds. And then overall, our budget, district-wide, 81% of our expenditures are for salaries and benefits of our employees, right? And so when I talk about the board will have difficult conversations, we'll have to prioritize to be able to identify 46 million if we use the amount of one-time revenues to balance 24-25. That has to be made up somewhat, right? Some of it could be ongoing fund balance and still be maintained within your 10 to 15. But a lot of it is program reductions, which generally in a school, because 81% of our budget is staff, salary and benefits, it could likely possibly mean program reductions, right? But those are conversations that would happen in terms of 25-26 budget discussions that will begin, November of this year for next year.
Just wanted to understand, this has been really helpful because I wanted to understand the lay of the land and what we may be gaining, losing, etc. And I couldn't see it through the numbers, so your explanation was really helpful. Thank you. That's all I have.
Chair Castro,
Yep.
can I just really quickly reinforce what Bob was saying to Board Member Vandermeulen? It's not a question
Sure.
right now. So Nikki, do you remember a couple of months ago, as we were still working through the last couple of months of the budget development, we had said that when we get to the October budget vote, if the operating referendum did not pass, we were still gonna have to vote on a budget in October, right?
Yes.
And so the one budget that we would vote on, if the referendum doesn't pass, gives us one set of numbers. The other one, if it does pass, gives us a slightly different set of numbers, but that the budget would still be set for this year. So we wouldn't be making immediate shifts in the budget when we vote in October. But to Bob's point, as soon as that vote occurs, we would have to start talking about 25-26.
So it could have, what you're saying, can I clarify if I may?
Yeah,
What you're saying is this could have drastic effects in 25-26?
yes,
I just wanted to
Yes.
make sure that was correct.
yes. And yeah, go ahead. Well, and I was just, this is not so much for my board colleagues, but for those who may be watching. I mean, one of the things that we know is by the time we start going back into budget development, like we vote on this budget in October, by November, we're starting up the conversation again. By February, we're looking at staffing workbooks and allocations for schools for the next school year. And so if the November operating referendum does not pass, we will be having a very different kind of conversation coming into this late fall and early winter. And then we'll be getting new health insurance costs and all the other things that come with operating the district. But going back to your point, Nikki, we would not be making changes on the floor at the October budget vote.
May I ask one more thing, Chair, and then I promise I'll let everyone else go?
Yep.
My last thing. So what you're saying, since we're not doing it on the floor, so next year's will be set, but the years after are going to be hard, and it could affect our programming, it could affect things like class size, stuff like that, correct?
Board Member Vanderbilt, yes, and remember our handbook has guidelines for class size. So there are some things that the board and the community has already made a priority, which means that it would have to be elsewhere. So that could be support positions, that could be, some of the additional positions that have been hired. That again, this community, our staff, our buildings, our parents, our students have advocated for. I mean, that's where the decisions, you know, may very well be left to be made.
That's what worries me. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Board Member Muldrow?
Did you say that the average house in Madison costs $453,000?
The average Madison home, average Madison home value, 457,300.
457,300.
Yes.
Okay. I want to say that that kind of blows my mind because if you go back to 2019, which really isn't that long ago, the average house was valued at about $300,000. And I do think that part of what that increase represents is a housing shortage locally. So it's very competitive to find housing in Madison. And I'm curious about how we factor in housing that's being developed. So areas that are gaining single family homes as well as larger kind of rental or condo spaces that are popping up across the isthmus. The city anticipates that Madison will grow on average by about 2,000 people per year, if not more, over the course of the next 10 years. How do we factor that into the mill rate if we know there will be more people and that will both mean that we're kind of splitting the pie amongst more residents. And it'll also mean that the value of housing is that much more kind of precious in our community as our community grows.
I agree with the comments that you're saying. I'm not sure how to account for that.
I do think a lot of the growth potential that I've heard in meetings I've been is young professionals, you know, coming to seek employment in rapidly growing industries and arms of those. I do think that, again, many have heard me say Madison being a destination city, we have to work to become that destination school district as well.
Absolutely.
A place where people can want to come live, work, and learn. I mean, that's who we want to be as a school district. And while we can control a lot of it, we can't control all of it. I do think it's important for us to advocate as a community with as many like-minded folks as possible who want to make this the best place to learn, to live, to work. And, you know, that's got to be our commitment moving forward as well.
I greatly appreciate that. And I do think getting back into the enrollment question, I think part of the reason I was really nervous about this year in terms of enrollment, because I've said this at many board meetings, 2019 was the lowest birth rate year since 1987. And those are the young people who are entering kindergarten this year. And so I really did think, at least in our primary years, that we'd see a significant decrease in students based on birth rates. I do wonder how much of that decrease is being offset by the expansion of the city itself, meaning are we seeing new demographics of students and kind of make up for the dynamic as it relates to birth rates?
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I base these on our projections. I will tell you, I know from the calculations I did and been confirmed in part, at least preliminary by the state. When I looked at third Friday of 24 compared to third Friday of 23, our 4-year-old kindergartens count went up 56 FTE. Our 5-year-old kindergarten count went down 38 FTE. Our grades 1 through 12 went up 113 FTE. Okay. So.
Can you repeat the numbers?
Yeah.
These are really they're my preliminary draft numbers. So I stand by these. These are what we were. Yeah. We'll get breakouts as but this is a full-time equivalency comparison, third price 24. Have an increase of 56 4-year-old full-time equivalent. A decrease of 38 full-time equivalent for 5-year-old kindergarten. An increase of 113 in grades 1 through 12. That also includes a decrease if you round up to 7 in our preschool special ed. Totals that increase 125.
I find that to be tremendously helpful in part because you see that 2019 low birth rate in that 38 decrease at 5K. In some ways, I think folks will start to refer to that like bump that comes the year after as kind of the boom of the pandemic babies. You know, I had one, so I feel like I did my part. I think, you know, I want to celebrate our district, the continuing growing of our enrollment. And I think that there's a real complexity in terms of what that means for our funding. And so I guess that's my last question is, as we see that increase of over 100 students, what does that mean for our per pupil funding?
Yeah, so
Such a deep sigh, Bob.
what?
So that was such a deep sigh.
Because the school finance is so complicated, right? So it impacts two things, right? And I can do some. These projections take a lot of time to get to the point where we could have this conversation, knowing that I know they're gonna change tomorrow, right? When we get our certified numbers. DPI finishes the work that they need to do. And I'll say, DPI's work is totally dictated by state law. State law requires that. So they're just doing what they are required by law. And so I can, once I get those numbers up, I can easily do the calculation by the FTEs and show you the dollar. But it will help us as we move forward. It'll help us build that sustainable revenue in the base revenue calculation versus that base revenue shrinking when we were declining, we were holding state, right? But again, it takes 3 years to fully impact that. In terms of the aid amount, right? The 24-25 student counts will be used for our 25-26 aid numbers. The 24-25 aid numbers we get tomorrow are based on our 23-24 counts. They used it prior. And so in terms of dollar and aid amounts, it's in terms of the actual money for the state. It impacts our revenue limit calculation. So that's how it's put together.
I really appreciate that. That's it for me.
Thank you. Had to recover from a sneezing fit. Board Member Nichols?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so can we go back to your chart?
Absolutely.
Because I know we took a pause there, and I know everybody's thrilled about getting back into those micro lines. So you were walking us through the fall budget non-passage column.
My next speak be passed.
And then you hadn't gotten to the passage yet.
Yes.
And what you did say is because the levy amount, that 366 million compared to the year that we just ended, 23-24, that was at 391 million, because the amount is smaller by about 25 million. It would naturally have an impact on the tax impact.
Correct.
Okay. So if the operating referendum doesn't pass, folks would see less in their tax impact. But we want the operating referendum to pass. So I guess I'm curious, yes, am I missing a point here, or what could we say about the passing referendum?
Then hop ahead to the next slide, Jesse,
Okay,
and then we can come back to finish going through the numbers, right?
okay,
So.
thank you.
If that's okay, right? So now I'll just point out comparison points that what Nichols just mentioned. So if the referendum passes, again, looking at that same number, so the 366 number becomes 396, 30 million higher. So if the referendum passes, the levy amount, and the board chooses to levy the entire amount, that adds $30 million, right? So compared to the prior year, when the voters approved 30 million in additional levy authority and the board levies the entire amount, compared to last year's levy, it's only an increase of $4.6 million. Okay,
Mhm.
so if you follow the same rationale down, you take your equalized value, which stays the same. The rate, the mill rate still drops with passage of a referendum by 0.65. So it's projected to be 9.15 instead of the prior year of 9.79. So it continues a 3-year decline on total rate,
Mhm.
which is largely attributable to the growth of city of Madison and gaining like value increasing. Okay. The tax impact on that. So if the voters vote yes on an operating referendum for 30 million this fall, and the board levies the 30 million, the tax bills would go up $27 compared to the prior year. That's with passage of the referendum. So the board begins building back sustainable revenues to continue the commitment to excellence in terms of 4-year-old kindergarten, early education, literacy, multilingual education, all what we've been talking about for 7 months. For $27 more compared to the average Madison home. Again, average Madison home, so it depends, you know, where you are in the taxing jurisdiction. Your assessed value is at compared to your neighbors, but the average Madison home would see a tax increase of 27. That's a comparison of the two questions
For the year.
for the year.
Okay. No. Oh, sorry. Let me fix my. Maybe Chair Castro can't see. Chair Castro, can I ask a question?
Yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so Bob, for the average person who doesn't follow school finance, mill rates, and any of these other complicated looking charts, how does that happen? That if the operating referendum passes and we have $30 million more, the tax impact is an increase of $27. How do we explain that to like the average person? Because it doesn't seem intuitive that would be the tax impact.
So two reasons how that happens, but primarily it happens when we get additional state aid, right? And so what's happening on our most recent projections, and I want to point out, although I'm talking about the complicated 2-page table, this is truly a team effort, right? We have staff across the departments, put together the budget proposals, working on the numbers, running all the numbers, double checking, triple checking. It's a team. It's a total team. And me practice on explaining to people that don't understand numbers. But the first thing with revenue limits is you compare it to the levy from last year. And the levy from last year is what the board levied last year. But the biggest factor when it comes to that difference is really under revenue limits. It's always revenue limits minus state aid. And so right now, when we did our June budget, we were projecting about 50 million in state aids to be received. Based on our most recent projections, that aid could be closer to $61 million. And as we get more state aid, our revenue limit projections don't change. What changes is state aid reduces property tax, right? So there's moving pieces. And the reason there's a July 1/8 estimate and a final October 15th 8 certification is the money that the state calculates on July 1, that 50 million of our share, is based on budgeted costs. And remember how we talked about our budgeted costs were higher than our actual expenditures. The state must use the budgeted costs. That's all the information that's available. But as districts submit unaudited actuals as the year goes on, the state will have tomorrow, they're gonna use our unaudited actuals that we submitted, right? So total costs go down, and general aid formula is based on total costs in districts across the state. Comparing shared cost per student to equalized value per student. And so the aid number will change, right?
Okay.
So that's the biggest change.
Okay. And that part, I think for me, that makes intuitive sense, that when we have more state aid, we don't have to levy as much from our taxpayers.
Correct.
And so as we've been getting information over the last couple of months, we're now in a better position to be able to talk more about what that state aid amount is more likely to be than maybe we were a few months ago. And it helps us to talk about the actual levy amount, which is what taxpayers see on their bill.
Right.
Okay,
I wanna get into a more refined conversation.
Okay,
Continue the
good.
conversations we had a year about that,
okay.
but that's absolutely true. Sure. Yes.
Is there something you need to add to refine it? Because I wanna make sure that I can talk about this with my neighbors, that I can talk about this with my friends. So anything that you feel like needs to be put out there, please feel free, Bob.
So what I wanna talk about, but if you allow me the discretion, what I make sure is I wanna get the questions about passage and non-passage, and then I wanna talk about the bottom part of this slide. Which is not on your budget adoption.
Oh, okay.
But it's the impact of the school levy tax credit, right? Which is a significant impact to the Madison Metropolitan School District, and more importantly, the taxpayers of Madison. But I want to first talk about what we're required to levy, what we're required to report, what we're required to do, which is the first two boxes on the slide. The total levy by fund and mill rate impacts. So if there are no more questions on that, then we can stay on the passage slide, because it doesn't matter how I'll explain it both. Does that make sense, Chair Castro?
Yep, that makes sense. Go ahead.
So President Nichols, this is what we're required by state law to report, because then you talked about what is the impact in the end to the taxpayers, right?
Mhm.
And I want to talk about this next part. And the reason I want to talk about this next part is I'll take you on that same column of the passage referendum proposal, where you see the levy of $396.3 million in total. A tax bill impact of $27 increase on the average Madison home compared to the year before. So there are two kinds of major property tax relief that the state of Wisconsin uses. One we just talked about, general aids. And I view it like general aids happens on the front end, the public end, the side that we need as a district and as a board to talk to our voters about. We need to levy $396.3 million based on our revenue limit and what we're gonna get for state. There's another pot of money, almost close to $1.3 billion this year, $1.275 billion that the state appropriates for property tax relief. Based on the amount of money, 3-year average of what school boards levy. So as a school board levies more, they get a bigger share of that 1.3 billion in property tax. But we historically are not allowed and haven't talked about it at this point in the conversation. Because for us, if you look at the projected impact of the school levy tax credit, this is an estimate, it's a projection, hasn't happened yet. It won't happen after all the school boards set levies by November 1. But we're estimated to get, that is, the municipalities that make up the Madison School District, almost $85 million, right? And so that $85 million, what it does to a tax bill is you're gonna levy and you're gonna report the levy of $396.3 million. We're gonna give that to the municipality. But before the municipalities actually calculate that individual property tax bill, they're gonna subtract 85 million off that reported levy. So what the taxpayers actually end up, and this isn't exact because it's a ratio based on your assessment individually, and it's also a ratio based on the municipalities and what value they have compared to, right? But this estimate is trying to show the true impact of the two big pots of money related or schools, school levy tax credit, and impacting the school levy. So it's making a projection, it's making an assumption. And so when you take into account the school levy tax credit, a projection, an estimate, use the same kind of formula. Tax bills compared to the prior year with passage of the referendum. It's actually a decrease in the total paid by the property taxpayers of $36, $35.65, right? And
So taxes would go down? Sorry.
an estimate on the average Madison home, if that school levy tax credit would be treated just like general aids, and you would report a levy of 311.3 compared to 396.3. Right? And so it's property tax relief appropriated by the legislature. It's money, that 1.3 billion, it's money the legislature talks about providing state school aids, right? But it's really property tax relief. It happens after the fact. And it's not distributed this way, but this is an estimation, a projection on what it would be, right? So it's what the average Madison home ended up actually paying out of their pocket on a tax bill when it's all said and done. Now, as I said, in reality, which is why I talk about the 396.3, which is why I talk about an increased tax bill estimated on an average Madison home of 26. But if you take into account as best you can to apply that 85 million, even though by law it happens by the local taxing authorities after we give the levy and before we issue the property tax bill, it reduces that school levy. Taxpayers actually pay. Now, it's not exact. This projection is not exact, but it's a really good approximation of the impacts. And I got the same numbers for non-passage, right? On the other slide. And I pointed out because when you talk about, to me, it's one of those things where, I mean, honestly, the way I look at it, some people can look at it differently, but the way I look at it is it's property tax relief that if it was provided on the front end, the Madison School District, the Madison School Board would say, we're only raising your taxes 311.3, not 396 point, right? 85 million less. It has a significant, you have to report a higher tax bill, tax levy, average tax bill than what taxpayers actually pay. On a tax credit that really is not school aids, although the state counts it in partial school revenues. They count it as providing money for schools. In reality, it's based on the levies that the Madison School Board levies. And we get a proportion of the money. And because, remember, because our school system is funded overall 90% by property taxes and only 10% by state aids, we capture on the formula more of that school levy tax credit because we levy more than a normal district because we're primarily supported by the property tax. So it's just it's a way when you're talking about the real impacts, right? Now, and you know, the city, as they're talking about the referendum, they talk about not only the school levy tax credit, the first dollar credit, the gaming lottery credit, right? Which is all to reduce all the levies the taxpayer sees. But if you pull out that school levy tax credit, this is an approximation, a projection of what it would be.
Okay.
But I think it's significant. I mean, it totally changes the conversation, right? Totally changes the conversation. Huge.
So we're required to still report the kind of the higher levy amount, the 396 million. So that goes kind of on record. And then what you're saying is that that time between the levy being kind of publicly authorized or voted on by the board and by the time an actual property tax bill is generated, the school level tax credit actually is applied, lowering the actual levy amount,
Yes,
and then the tax bill reflects that.
correct.
Beautiful.
So what we're required to report is the second, the page 2 of the budget publication adoption format, which is really the top part of the screen that should.
Right.
It shows the non-passage of 366.1, the passage of 396.3. The comparison that we're doing on this budget publication format is comparing non-passage to the approved number. Right, which shows the non-passage rate of 8.45 and 0.15. But so as we talk about the long term, the other conversation we've been having is different ways the state could consider and provide, I think, true funding, more transparent funding to support public schools, right? This school levy tax credit, because the legislature chose to put $590 million into the school levy tax credit in the last biennial budget, which is a significant increase to the $940 million that was in the appropriation. It's a significant switch, right? They could have made the decision to put that in an aid formula, could have made a decision to revenue limit calculation, reducing the levies of all the school boards, but they chose not to do that. It's below the line, it's after all the municipalities issue their levy. Okay. Any questions on that? Or Chair Castro, any questions? Back to you.
Board Member Nichols?
Thank you, Chair. So not that these are related, but I do want to just try to use this opportunity to maybe clarify something. So when we go back to slide 27, talking about the use of fund balance, different than the levy conversation, right? It sounds like from what you're saying is if we have a passing referendum in November, the taxpayers can expect a pretty minimal or, minimal increase. I'm saying minimal, not that any increase is a good thing. I'm just saying minimal, meaning $27 versus maybe a larger number than we have, that folks might be holding in their head, okay? That's one thing that's good. To the fund balance, though, you do show that even with a passing referendum, we still will need to spend $22.9 million from our one-time funding, our one-time funds in fund balance. And so can you just clarify a little bit about why even with a passing referendum, even if we levied the full $30 million, why we still need to use one-time funds to balance the budget?
Yes. So we still have a structural deficit. It's more than 30 million. And the board approved $100 million to build sustainable revenue. Scaffold up not only the available revenues, but also the tax impacts. Because remember, as I was talking about from July 1 till now, right, we have a revenue limit picture. But our aid is up, I think it's gonna be up $11 million from our June budget, right? And so the odd thing about talking about revenue limits, right, is we talk about asking voter approval to give ourselves authority to increase above that revenue.
Mhm.
And we have to look at it as the law is the same and what is the levy cost of that. But what we're not able to do is, once you get that 100 million after 4 years, or in this case, 30 million this year. Next year, if the legislature appropriates more for general aid or provides money on the front end, right? That entire $30 million could be funded by an increase of revenue limits, and there'd be zero property tax impact, right?
Mm.
In that year that we're expecting a property tax impact.
Okay.
And so when you seek authority to exceed your revenue limit, it's always the full amount on the levy that year, right? Because state aid, or I was saying, state aid is based on your numbers that you did before, so it takes you impacted. But in this case, right, we're comparing a budget to what was approved last fall. In total revenues and total expenditure and fund balance. So in our case, we need to use 22.9 as projected for this budget to end the year balanced 24-25. Even with 30 million.
Hey. Any other questions from board members? Board member Mosner Feltham?
Another question. You remember, like, you go buy a TV, like it costs $200, but send this thing in, you get a $75 rebate from Samsung or whatever. Not that we're talking about TVs. For property taxpayer. Kind of the same idea, right? We're gonna charge you the $250 for the TV. That's what we gotta tell you it costs, that's right. But when push comes to shove and you're doing your budget at the end of the month or the year or whatever, the actual difference to me, because Samsung sent me $75. You know, it's the 125 or whatever.
That's what the school levy tax credit is, right? You have a bill.
Making sure that I understand correctly.
You have a bill, but what you actually, you're gonna be told you have a bill from the school board, from us. And that's what your tax bill is,
Mhm.
but that's what you're gonna be told on the front end. But when you actually get the final amount owed, it's gonna be less because the school levy tax.
Okay, let me try it a different way. Going to buy a TV, $200 TV. I'm like, I saw it in the ad, right? Okay, I really gonna need this TV. Like, I care about my TV, which I like compare. It's ridiculous. I need a new TV, right? Go buy a new TV. I think it's gonna be $200 because that's what it said on the ad. And then I get there and they're having an amazing sale. And they're like, actually, the TV that you went to buy, that you brought $200, that told you it was gonna be $200, surprise, is $150. Closer than the rebate?
Both work.
Okay.
Yeah.
The rebate was a better deal, because in my story, it was $75 versus.
Yeah.
I don't need a new TV. I do need the children of Madison to get an excellent education. Okay, just making sure I understood correctly. Thank you. That's it for me.
Okay, any more questions from board members?
Chair Castro, may I ask a question? Thank you. I feel like one of the things that always feels counterintuitive to me is that I am a homeowner here in Madison, and my taxes have gone up significantly in the last 3 years because the value of my house has gone up. And so what I would love to think is that that additional revenue is already going to the school district. So if it's not, right, if I'm being taxed more already and it's not going to the school district, where is it?
So it's replaced with the school levy tax credit.
Okay,
So instead of the taxpayer paying that money, the money is the levy credit is just like general aids. It's a way for the legislature to reduce the property tax. It's after all the municipalities set their levy, right? And so when the municipalities get it, we need 300, go to our slide, we need to have $396.3 million. That's what the board has levied. We need those dollars to have a balance, but if you go to slide 29, Jesse. So with passage, the levy that we need, the revenues that were identified, right, our revenue limit minus our general aid, $396.3 million. So when we do the tax settlement, when the taxes are collected, we're gonna get $396.3 million. But the taxpayers, in this projection, right, based on the formula, the state's gonna pay 85 million of that, 396.3. So the taxpayers are only gonna pay for 311.3. So if your bill that you actually pay will total 311.3 in this projection estimation to try to get close to what that impact of that school levy tax credit is.
Okay. The other thing I just wanna mention in relationship to that is that we're not the only school district going to referendum in November. There's actually over 150 districts going to referendum this November. And there's about 400 school districts in Wisconsin, a little over 400 school districts. 421, thank you. Let's get exact with our numbers. But that means about a quarter of districts, about 25% of districts across the state are going to referendum. And I say that to normalize, one, that we need to fund public education well all across Wisconsin, and two, that we don't have a funding formula that does that. And we don't have a funding formula that allows for us to keep up with inflation. And we don't have a funding formula that aligns with giving schools additional authority as people are already taxed more. And so I do think how MMSD has arrived at this moment, like so many other districts across the state, is relevant to the conversation that we're having. And also, I think the fact that we're a growing community does mean that we have a potential a lot of communities don't have to offset this expense to the individual taxpayer. And so I really appreciate the presentation and the nuance and detail that you're bringing to this conversation. And my last question is, if my house is valued, you know, at another $50,000 more next year, will folks, like, I think there's a temptation to say if we don't pass the referendum, folks won't see an increase in their taxes. But if people's property values continue to increase, people will continue to see an increase in their property taxes. Is that true?
It all depends. I mean, because it depends on if everyone else is going up at the same value as you're going up, you'll have the same proportion of the total levy, right? And so under revenue limits, it comes back to revenue limits. You have a levy, that levy is dependent on how much state aid you get, right? And so the legislature will start talking about 25, 26 aid, you know, in the spring of 25, right? We won't know what that's gonna be until we get a budget passed, right? But that'll impact it. And so your actual amount you pay as a property taxpayer is contingent on a couple of things, that total levy amount. But then the proportion your assessment is to all the other taxpayers and they're going up compared to you, right? Some neighborhoods are assessed higher than others. And so if everyone stays the same and you go up, you're gonna get a bigger share of whatever that total levy is.
Is any of this offset by the annexation of town of Madison? Or I'm sorry, there's another town that was annexed, so it would shift their code.
All taxing jurisdictions end up being assigned to a district, right? So if the town of Madison ceases to exist, some of that will go to the Madison School District and others will go to whatever the districts are, but it impacts the total value in our total picture. We have fewer municipalities supporting the Madison School District than we did before the dissolutions and changes.
I really appreciate you pointing out that the state's biannual budget will really impact how people see that show up on their taxes. And I also appreciate that you answered with like that all depends, which feels very Magic 8 Ball of you. Thanks so much, Mom.
A lot of moving pieces to the school finance puzzle.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right. Can I add one? Can I have the discussion at one point about this conversation? Because I've seen this and we continue to talk at our community sessions. And I just want to be clear in terms of the magnitude and the timing, because I've seen this talk recently about the 46.3 million in one-time funds. If the voters do not approve ongoing revenue, there was some talk about we could all go back to the drawing board, right? And possibly look at a future election cycle. But I just want to point out some fundamentals of not only state law when it comes to employee contracts, but also the timing of the need for us to have ongoing sustainable revenues. The need for the district to have ongoing sustainable revenues is today at the November 5th election. If the voters choose not to give us ongoing sustainable revenues on November 5th, we will have to make serious considerations in terms of priorities for 25-26. And the spring election, if that happens, if we go to spring election, we have to notice our employees before the April election to get additional revenues. And so we'll have to make staffing decisions, program decision before, because we need to notify our employees that job in 25-26 before the spring election. And so even if we figure out a way to minimize that as much as possible, a spring election vote says we could potentially be given the authority to raise taxes in the fall of 2025, which means we won't have revenue until January of 2026 in terms of settlement of the taxes. So this notion that you can reconsider without any hard decisions or potential program reductions, including staff reductions, right, is really not feasible, right? Because of how state law is on both fronts in terms of the timing of it. So I want to make that clear to anybody in terms of, which I think we've been talking about that, but that continues to be, I think, a more recent kind of push. I just wanted to keep us all on the same page.
thank you.
All right. So now we're gonna go to more teammates, talk about just an update on the referendum. And so I'm gonna hand it over to Jen Shefke, and she's gonna talk about where we are at in terms of the time changes since we last met.
Good, thanks, Bob. So Jesse, we're gonna wanna go to slide, thanks. So in this timeline, you can see there's a lot of building blocks that we have used to get to where we are now with a solid foundation of approaching the November 5th ballot. So we have done multiple community engagements over the course since February. We had a long-range facility plan that was presented to the board. We had the facility condition report that was in these meetings about what the language of the ballot would look like, and then ultimately what was underneath that language. All led us up to now. So if we go to the next slide, we can zoom in on the last few months of community engagement. We'll talk about in a little bit. Okay. Okay. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We have done some requests for proposals. We saw we had an owner's rep that came on through consent agenda in September. That owner's rep will be doing some pre-referendum work with us. And should the referendum be successful for facilities, we'll continue that work. Should there not be successful in the facilities referendum, we will discontinue that contract. You'll soon see in consent agenda coming up for October, we have the architect RFP for architectural services that'll be coming up for your consideration. And those services will start pending a successful facility referendum. One note, we have moved one of the request for proposal timelines. So if you look way over in January, you'll see that the construction management RFP has been moved to January. So that was originally going to happen in November. We've shifted it out of the recommendation from our newly brought on owner's rep. The big reason for shifting it is there's about 2/3 of the cost containment of any kind of work happens in contract negotiation and setting up the right request for proposals. So we want to take the time to really make sure we get it right and therefore have a positive impact on our cost. So shifting it to that point will be okay, and we can still start to consider some of the geothermal work, even without having that construction management vendor on contract. So I think that takes you back up.
So Jesse, I just want to give an update in terms of, we've kept the slides for reference in terms of the question, but Jesse, go to slide 45. So this is just a summary of what we've done to date, in terms of the August, September engagements. And I just want to update folks to where we have been, in this month, and we have a couple of, virtual sessions scheduled, a couple more community sessions scheduled, for the month of October. So we continue to look at it. But in August and September, we went to, the 7 school sites, 10 schools for community engagement. In addition to those, we did 4 citywide information sessions. In total, more than 25 community information presentations in different forms and at different times. We also internally did 4 training sessions for what we were calling our referenda ambassadors, largely the school principals and school administration. In addition, we received an additional 750 school survey responses. So Jesse, the next slide. At those sessions, what we talked about was the budget overview, the large overview, the discussion of the school facility. Specifically, we showed some dream boards in terms of what could a new or major renovated school look like or include. And then, of course, the survey information. We had 750 surveys added to over 4,000 surveys. Go ahead, Jen.
And at those community engagement sessions, we've been getting a lot of fabulous questions from our community members, and those questions are responded to in the moment, but we also then take them to our FAQs on the website. We address those questions and have them there. So we have a rolling total of a lot of the different questions that have been coming in and some responses that can be used for the community to understand the impact on them.
So that concludes the prepared remarks, if there are any questions.
Okay, any questions from, okay, Board Member Nichols?
No question. I just wanted to say, I know many of the board members kind of attended some of the community referendum sessions. I was at Anana and Cherokee and Goodman Community Center. And I really appreciated the opportunity to sit with people from the community, from parents that are attending our schools and hear the questions they were asking. And just taking those engagement sessions so thoughtfully. I could tell that, you know, they were really tuned into kind of the presentations. And it was nice to hear folks being, I think, maybe pleasantly surprised by some of our some of the results that we have for young people, like really wanting to better, you know, like I could see that they were leaning in when we were talking about the results of the number of students that graduate from our district with early college credit. They seem to really like and appreciate the fact that we've invested in 4K and had some good follow-up questions about like our instruction and our teaching and learning. And then I also noticed there were several questions that came up regarding the facilities, mostly around, there weren't questions about the age of the schools or like why we chose the schools that we did. I think the questions that I sometimes heard were more around why had we not decided to maybe combine some schools or do some other things because of enrollment at those schools. And I just want to say that I really appreciated that folks had an opportunity to ask those questions in their sessions and that the staff were able to take those questions right in the moment and really explain why, building new may be a more cost-effective approach than renovating an older building, or why the way that we look at usage of square footage in a building may be very different in the day-to-day than what you see on a piece of paper around like a utilization rate. And I just am really thankful that those sessions were held. And ultimately, I hope that we continue over the next couple of weeks as board members to find ways to keep talking about this referendum, like the operating and the facility, because I wouldn't want us to take for granted that even though our Madison community has been really, really supportive in the past, that that we don't have to like earn their vote yes on this. So just wanted to comment that. I don't know if there are other board members from the sessions that you went to, if there was anything that stood out to you from questions that were asked, or where people seem to, maybe have some confusion. Or excitement.
Yep. Board Member Pearson.
Yeah, so the sessions that I was able to go to, I think some of the sessions had students that were there. And I thought it was pretty powerful to have elementary school students kind of state like what in the moment that they thought would make their school better. And sometimes we as adults somewhat discount like young people, their thoughts, especially like elementary schools, because it may be just too granular, or they use a ton of imagination. However, I think that this process and the sessions I went to specifically, those elementary school students were very pragmatic. They did have some really good thoughts, and I was really appreciative for them participating in from a student's perspective in the day-to-day life. And so sometimes, I'm a graduate of MMSD, so there are obviously things, and I'm a mom of MMSD. I'm also a homeowner, so there are things that I'm also like, oh, like thinking about myself. But it was really beautiful to see our students have an input in some of those sessions and ask questions. So and kudos to Megan for helping the one student when we were at, I believe it was Anana. So
Thank you. Yep. Board Member Moser Feltham.
Appreciate the invitation to talk about it. I think one of the things that, they were so beautiful, like for one thing, it's just so good to see people engaging in this important thing. And like, I'm always like, don't cry, Blair, don't cry. But one of the things that stuck out to me that is like, people are like, okay, I get the big ideas, but like, what about the tree at this school? Right? What about the sunlight at this school in this corner? And it's just such a reminder that schools are community hubs that matter to the people who go there and the people who send their kids there. And also that every school is different, and that like, a passing facilities referendum would be such a gift to be able to like really dial in with the community. So we need the support to get there, and then we need the support and then what, right? What's the actual design here? And that to me is just a really good reminder that schools are unique and individual, that they matter a lot to people, and that there's so much history. Like we're talking about renovating some old schools, right? And I think a lot, you've heard me talk about it a lot. I have this like idea, whatever, it's not important. But like we're talking about like generations of Madisonians who have schools. And it means a lot to people. that we preserve what's been generative and affirming in our schools as we look forward to the future. So I appreciate the opportunity, the invitation to reflect on that. I was at Choki and Sherman, where I guess my kids will go, which was also kind of wild to be thinking about, like, my kids are gonna be in middle school, like, what? Just wild. So that's what stuck out to me.
Yep, Board Member Muldrow, then Board Member Simkin.
Thank you, Chair Castro. I really appreciate this presentation and kind of the clarity we have in terms of our facilities projects. I think what makes me really excited about these projects is that we are honing in at the middle school level. And I think the instructional implications of that are really profound. And so I think having this opportunity to talk a little bit about what it means to lead at the middle school level and to really reimagine what our facilities look like at the middle school level is a little bit of where I want to start in terms of what can our community look forward to their schools being like a few years from now. They're, you know, for somebody like Blair, it's gonna send a couple kiddos to middle school in a few years. What would this investment mean when you walk into those buildings? And I know that there are less glamorous components about this. I know it's hard to tell people like your kids are really gonna benefit from working plumbing because they definitely are. Like, it's really important. I have a daughter in high school right now, just came out of middle school, the bathroom was super important to her. And I think that there are these real kind of investments in learning spaces and educational opportunities that I'd like to see us speak to or foreshadow.
Thank you. Board Member Simkin?
Oh, I was asking that, so I was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And we were asked a question in a recent RFP process. What does success look like? And I mean, it's really about learning environments that facilitate deep and meaningful learning for all of our kids. It's about buildings that reflect the space that our kids and our staff deserve. It's about having kids that can, and staff who can reach every single nook and cranny of the buildings because it's accessible. It's all of that kind of stuff in there. I mean, that's what we can look forward to, right? It's these big aspirations, but it's the day-to-day betterment of all of our kids.
Thank you so much for speaking to that. My last question, Chair Castro, and thank you for giving me the time, is really about kind of our efforts related to sustainability. And I've championed this work, and I'm really proud of the work we've done as a board to solidify our goal and our timeline. And in a lot of ways, this feels like the first phase of that work of incorporating sustainability and renewable energy into these referendum projects and what that means for the health of our environment, what that means for our green energy workforce. My question's gonna hone in on Senate Middle School as one of the schools that's named, in part because Senate Middle School is very, very close to La Follette. And so were we to install geothermal heating or HVAC at Senate, would we be able to create a system that serves both Senate and La Follette?
I would say at this current moment, it's not in the scope. That's something we can explore. It's not in the current referendum. But if, depending on how it's designed and what the capabilities of the site is, that's the feasibility piece next. Is we'll have to see what it would take us for a site. Each site is very different and so that have to be a study that had to be done. We potentially have to do that as a separate workforce, or if it could be incorporated, we'll review that.
Okay, I look forward to kind of learning more about how we're incorporating our goals related to energy and sustainability into these projects. And I think that there's a lot to be gained there. The last thing I want to say about these referendums is that they create thousands of jobs. The workforce it takes to build schools, to remodel schools. It is a genuine way that we pour resources back into our community. We invest in ourselves by investing in each other. And so I hope that folks who are looking at this and are really honing in on kind of the expense side of it, understand the investment in real people, everyday folks who live and work here and send their kiddos to school here. That's it for me, Chair Castro. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. Board Member Simpkin.
So, cause I think. But I will. So I went to several of the. But I appreciate not taking for granted that just because Madison is really, really pro-education and really supportive of our schools, that everyone's gonna vote yes for these referenda. I think what I observed was people really wanting to dig deep into how they can support the referenda, so understanding the financial impact for them as individuals, and then wanting to say yes was what I felt at all three of the listening sessions I went to, which were in very different parts of the city. And some were with mostly staff and families, and some were mostly community members. And that sense of, you know, like we want this, we want to have strong schools. We just need to understand the math, and it's complicated math. And so I think we're trying really hard to do that, and we have to keep doing that until the end.
Chair Castro, thanks for letting us share a little bit of our reflections. I didn't mean to take over your meeting, but I appreciate the space for us to be able to share a little bit of board perspective on what we've been hearing and the ways that we want to be able to support our community to find a way to vote yes. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just share from my perspective. I was able to attend one, and there is just immense pride in people's local neighborhood school, and they're very invested in that school being successful, not just the building, but the people within it. And so being able to articulate a vision on how these resources will make those schools stronger and what we can all be proud in will be really important for a successful campaign. Okay, moving on. That was the last agenda item. Any parting words? Okay, may I please get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Board
Second.
member, thank you. Board member Fernando, your advisory vote.
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.